UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network, where we go through movies, remakes, and sequels for you. My name is Brandon-Shea Mutella, and I am your host. And joining me, as always, is my ever-constant chicken co-host, Zach Moore. You chicken?
Nobody calls me chicken, Brendan.
Chicken? Bark, 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 bark.
I've suddenly developed a new character flaw.
Yes, you certainly have. And, I think we'll be happy to discuss that. And joining us today to discuss this is nobody. Unfortunately, something came up for our special guest who's going to hopefully join us next time. But for today, it's just going to be Zach and I to continue our discussion on the Back to the Future trilogy.
Brandon, I got to say, you're a sight for sore eyes, but you look different.
I do look different. I'm played by Brad Pitt.
There you go. Yes, the casting roundtable continues. Back to the Future, but we'll get into it. But hey, Back to the Future Part 2, right? I'll just say this now, and we'll jump to the trivia. This is a trilogy. It's like Star Wars for me. Growing up, where I'd always watch them together on tapes, so I don't have individual memories of every individual film. But I will say this is the one I liked most as a kid, and as I've gotten older, I don't like it most anymore.
That's crazy. I hated this one when I was a kid. I didn't like the dark 80s, and I didn't like that they went back to the first movie. So all I liked in this movie when I was a kid was the future stuff.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into it as we talk, but yeah. So let's start off with some trivia, as we always do. Now, Back to the Future Part 2. Right?
Back
came out
to the future.
I'm back from the future.
Part 2.
I just sent you back to the future. So, Back to the Future Part 2, 1989. 4 years after the first Back to the Future. So you're like, hey, it was a huge hit. What took so long? Well, one, they filmed Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3 back to back.
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future, yes. Genius. But they filmed it back to back, not simultaneously. Like some movies they filmed simultaneously, like Lord of the Rings, for example. But with this one, they filmed Back to the Future 2 first, and then Back to the Future 3 with some overlap of certain scenes. Like when they leave Jennifer on her porch in Back to the Future Part 2, and then she wakes up there in Back to the Future Part 3. They filmed that at the same time, because why not, right? But for the most part, they filmed everything first for Back to the Future 2, and then second for Back to the Future Part 3, and that's why you have a trailer for Back to the Future 3 at the end of Back to the Future 2, which is really unique, I think. I really haven't... The only other movie I can think of having something similar to that is
Reloaded.
Well, yes, Matrix Reloaded, right?
Yeah.
I didn't think about that until you brought it up, actually. But the Captain America, the first Avenger, the end credits scene was a trailer for the Avengers.
Okay.
So, which was coming out the following year. But this wasn't even at the end of the credits. It was right after the movie, before the end credits. So a unique approach there. I guess just to promise, hey, we filmed it. It's coming. Don't worry. It's coming next year. You're not going to wait 4 more years. Another reason they had to wait so long is because Robert Zemeckis, the director, was making Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was a very ambitious film at the time. Came out the previous year, and it combined live action footage and characters and actors with animation, like Roger Rabbit, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, all these characters appearing in the same film. Quite its own achievement in its own right, but very ambitious film. Took a long time to work that out. So Bob Zemeckis had to, Bob Gale had to write the script, the first draft of it, by himself for Back to the Future 2, while Robert Zemeckis was busy with Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Now,
well, also, I mean, there's not a lot of coverage between the two. Like, they're very, very different sets and different costumes. Like they couldn't really film them simultaneously, right?
Right. I mean, they're very
Yeah.
different
Very
films.
different
Like
films.
you think of like Lord of the Rings. It's all kind of the same stuff going on. The
Yeah.
first two Superman movies, Superman 1, Superman 2, also filmed simultaneously. So it can be done when there's a lot of overlap of sets and actors and characters. But these are, although it's part 2 and part 3, they are very distinct stories as well.
Right.
So there's no advantage to filming those simultaneously. So.
Like, did Richard Donner 1 and 2, they were filmed at the same time?
That's correct. That's why there's so much Richard Donner footage, because he finished 80% of Superman 2 before he was fired by the Salkinds to produce that film, and then they brought in Richard Lester. They reshot a lot of the Donner stuff and then finished the extra 20%.
Crazy.
So, it's crazy times. Movies, man.
Movies. What a
The
disaster.
magic of the movies. So all your favorite movies were a disaster and a nightmare to make. Blood, sweat, and tears. Right? No pain, no gain. Right? Now, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale are on record saying that they had no idea they were going to do a sequel. They didn't really want to do a sequel. They thought it'd be a fun tag at the end of the first one to say, hey, look, we went to the future. It's crazy. And they're off to more adventures in the Flying DeLorean. But they kind of painted themselves in a corner by having Jennifer with Marty when they go to the future. And they said had they planned out having a sequel, they would not have included her, because they wanted everything to focus on Marty. There wasn't much for her to do, and she would kind of get in the way. So that's why they kind of take her out of the story pretty early on. And she has a little bit of a part, and it comes back around at the end of 3. But you think about Back to the Future. Yeah, Marty has his girlfriend Jennifer, but she's really barely in the movies at all. So
They're barely in the trilogy, yeah. That's kind of one of the weird things that I think about this movie, and one of the detractors for me of it is like having her there, because they do just push her to the side. But I guess, yeah, if they painted themselves into a corner, then they couldn't really start it without her.
Mm-hmm. And also something I didn't really think through is when Doc comes back at the end of the first film, he doesn't have Einstein with him. And he went to the future with Einstein. So that's why they included the dialogue about Doc having to go pick up Einstein from the suspended animation clinic. Because he never even knew he was gone. So anyway, they didn't really need to do that. But again, I appreciate the attention to detail, which is a staple of this trilogy. There's a lot of little things that you could say, hey, wait a minute. And they do try their best to fill in those potential plot holes. So I give them credit there.
Right.
Now, originally, only one sequel was planned. And when they were scripting it, it was known as Paradox, and included all the elements of both these films together. Like, it was like all the back and forth and revisiting of the movie, the first movie, in part 2, plus the Old West stuff at the end. But it's going to be too much. It's going to be too involved. So that's when they decided to split it up. Also, they had some other ideas about where to go with the going into the past. Mm-hmm. Initially, they were thinking, we'll have Marty go to the 60s and meet his parents in college, and they're like hippie college students, and wouldn't that be fun? But doing the math, it wouldn't really make any sense, because if they're seniors in 1955, they would not be in college in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Even at a stretch, if it's like 1960, right, they might still be in college, but the protest era is what they were going for, and that would have just been too far in the future, for his parents to be hippies, which was kind of the idea. Also, part of the idea, again, was Marty, this time he was going to stop his parents from conceiving him. Something would happen, and the timing would get off, and because you joke about that with alternate timelines, right? Like, if you mess something up, there's a specific, not to get too biological here, but there's a specific sperm that has to go in a specific egg at a specific time in order to get the person you are, and if you change like any micron of anything, that will alter things. So, but it's a conceit of movie making, like, how it is, it all works itself out.
Which
as
is why
it did.
The Kelvin timeline makes no sense. Because Chekhov is suddenly 2 years younger.
Chekhov is younger, exactly. So, anyway, but that was part of the idea, but they thought, well, it's not going to work because of the 60s, and then it's kind of repeating the whole thing in the first movie again to a certain extent. So they decided not to go there. Also, one of the ideas, though, which I thought was kind of clever, was Mr. Fusion was broken when they got back to the 60s. So 1985 Doc, so we'll refer to him, I guess, as this whole conversation, had to get the help of the 1960s Doc, without messing up the timeline, that kind of thing. So that was one of the ideas they were playing with. But ultimately, I think that was a good idea not to go in that direction, And I like how the part 2 kind of came together for what they ended up doing there. So
yeah, we'll talk about that next time. But yeah, no, definitely, I love the way that they brought it all around with the third one.
Absolutely. Now, according to Michael J. Fox, he first found out about there being a sequel to be Back to the Future when he watched the VHS of the movie. And he said to be continued, and then he immediately called his agent to make sure he was going to be in the sequel. Because we were talking about last time, they added that on the VHS, the to be continued. So I think that's pretty funny. Now, it did take 11 months to film this movie and Back to the Future Part 3, like we were talking about. That's almost a year. So that is a long shoot. But that helps a lot, especially for all the back and forth and the timeline. You know, whenever you see movies, they're supposed to take place like right after each other, but like actors look different, they age. I mean, I think about The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, for example, to use a Star Wars comparison. That's the next day, and everybody looks pretty different. You know, I think, and it's weird. A lot of it's complete a side note, but a lot of the characters, they look more like their Force Awakens selves in The Rise of Skywalker than they do in The Last Jedi. I mean, I'm just talking about like appearance and costume and all this. It's just interesting. So again, an advantage to filming back to back, everything at once. Now, in the 1985 scene, in the alternate 1985 scene, when Marty was watching the documentary about the history of Biff, talking about how they filmed 2 and 3 back to back. They see a picture of his great grandfather or great great grandfather, I'm not sure which, but Mad Dog Tannen. Now that was an early makeup test for Mad Dog, and his look was changed a little bit when we actually see him because again they're filming part 3 after part 2, but that's why they had that, and you can see that, and we'll talk about it as we talk about the film. But there's little bits and pieces here where they're kind of like teeing up part 3, which I think are pretty clever, and that's one of them. Now, we talked about it here, joking off the top, but this is the film that introduces the character tick of Marty losing his self-control when somebody calls him a chicken. And the idea behind that was that Zemeckis and Gale thought that Marty didn't have any flaws in the first film, so they said, well, let's give him a little character tick. What do you think? What do you think about just that whole idea of adding that? Because I mean, I thought he was a pretty just normal kid. I mean, he was late to class. He had insecurity about music. I didn't think he was like a perfect character or anything. So they felt the need to add that to kind of give him give him a flaw.
Yeah, I don't. I think that is nonsense, and I do not like that addition to that character at all. I think it's silly. I think it's ridiculous and
childish.
It's dumb. It's really childish. It doesn't make any sense. Like this guy. We'll talk about it in the movie. The guy is just imagine going up to anybody and you just know how to manipulate this person. Like, I don't know. Here, bankrupt your life and family. Here, what are you, chicken? Nobody calls me chicken. Here's my card. Like, I don't know. It's really dumb.
I agree. Now, Elizabeth Shue is Jennifer in part 2 and part 3. Claudia Wells, the original Jennifer actress, did not return for part 2 because at the time she had stopped acting to care for her mother, whom had diagnosed with cancer, and she didn't actually start acting again until 2008. So she is recast here, as we said at the end of the first conversation. Let's chalk it up to a change in the timeline here, right? But I don't even, as a kid, I didn't even realize it because they replicate shot for shot the end of the first film to start off the second one very well.
Yeah.
And there's only a few slight differences, and mainly Christopher Lloyd's performance. Like, I think my favorite moment, and Marty's like, "What happened to us, Doc? Did we become assholes or something?" And there's like a moment where you see Doc like looking. He's like, no. Like, it's just a little comedic beat. That's the only real difference that I can see in how they play it. But man, shot for shot, they really replicated it really well. So that tricks your brain into thinking, oh, well, this must have been Jennifer the whole time.
Right. It is well done, and they obviously retcon a little bit of stuff and insert a couple of scenes here and there, but whatever.
Right, of course. Now, Elijah Wood has his first film appearance. He is one of the boys in the Cafe 80s who is playing the video game that Marty has to use his hands. That. Yeah, that's like a baby's toy. That's those kids, and Elijah Wood is one of them when seeing Marty play the video game. So and that's his first on-screen role.
That's hilarious. I did not notice that. I'll have to go back and check that out.
Now, when they were making the first film, they shot all the 1950s stuff first in Hill Valley, in